Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm TX141, but you may call me Paul. Welcome you all to a brand new Ace in a Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we shall be reviewing the North American Aviation P-51 Mustang. This is an American fighter aircraft coming into Tier 3 and a battle rating of 3.7. To provide you all a brief historical overview of the fighter in general, all the way up to and including this iteration on your screen, we must realise that the P-51 Mustang arrived on paper in 1940. It was the result of the British RAF's need for more Curtiss P-40 Warhawk fighters and the resultant dialogue between the British Purchasing Commission and North American Aviation. In April of this year, North American put forward the design for an advanced fighter which would be heavily armed, fast and able to operate at high altitude. But there was a stipulation. The prototype had to be ready within 120 days. This was due to the British RAF's fears of German advancement across Western Europe in this time span. The prototype NA-73X was to arrive within 117 days, in all but its engine, with the Allison V1710-39 inline engine supplying 1,100 horsepower arriving late. And this late arrival meant that the plane flew for the first time as of the 26th of October 1940. Despite this, the test program was trouble-free, meaning the plane was soon adopted into British hands under the designation of Mustang, with the first production run of Mustang Mark Is flying initially on the 1st of May 1941. The Mustang Mark Is were to be primarily used in the fighter reconnaissance role, as well as ground attack. British pilots were soon to realise the potential of the plane at low altitudes with great manoeuvrability and a high top speed, although the plane was to suffer at higher altitudes due to the poor engine power and performance, with that Allison engine suffering above 15,000 feet. This meant that the Mustang Mark I was not suitable for the European theatre of operations, or we should say Western European theatre, due to the higher altitude ceilings at which the dogfights were initiated. As we move on to the next page, we see that the majority of the early production models, i.e. the Mustang Mark I and the Mustang Mark Ia, were to feature different armaments, with the Mustang Mark I featuring a combination of 4 12.7mm and 4 7.62mm machine guns to the wings, and the Mustang Mark I's featuring 4 20mm cannons. On top of this, the initial production run contained a mixture of these types, but in total 620 aircraft, and 2 of these planes were to be handed over to the United States Armoured Air Corps as part of an agreement for the NA-73 to be adopted into the RAF service. These planes were redesignated as XP-51, and despite their successful test programs, they saw little development due to the prominence of the P-38 and P-47 fighters in American hands. This was to change in 1942, with the United States Armoured Air Force, as the USAAC was now known, obtaining 55 Mustang Mark I's, which were to be redesignated as P-51 Mustangs. This is the plane you see on your screen right now. These P-51s were mostly used in the Southeast Asian and North African theatres in 1943, as either ground attack or reconnaissance fighters, the recon planes being known as F-6A. These were roles that played to the plane's strengths whilst mitigating its weaknesses. 2 additional P-51s were also bought by the United States Armoured Air Force and redesignated as testbed fighters XP-78s, and upon the installation of Merlin engines into these planes in the middle of 1942, these planes were redesignated as XP-51Bs, and we all know where we're going here, ladies and gentlemen, because these XP-51Bs were to act as the test beds for the future Merlin generations of the P-51 Mustang and lead to the eventual arrival of the legendary P-51D. And so, with our historical overview out of the way, let us take a look how the P-51 Mustang handles in War Thunder. For today's game, we are on the ground strike map African Canyon using the following setup. Air target belts for our 20mm Hispano Mark II cannons. The reasoning here is due to the absolutely devastating firepower that the mixture of high explosive fragmentation incendiary and high explosive fragmentation semi-armour piercing incendiary rounds confer on this plane. No opponent will be safe. On top of this, you also have to consider there is a lack of tracer component within these belts, which is brilliant for the 2 main playstyles or means of attack that we will pursue. Firstly, extreme distance head-ons at distances of approximately 1,000 metres or a kilometre, and secondly, boom and zoom passes where we hope to catch our opponents by surprise from the rear. In both these situations, we do not want a tracer whizzing by the pilot's cockpit or indeed towards the enemy pilot to warn them of our encroaching presence. On top of this, we also have a 600 metre gun convergence, which will enable us to have a shotgun spray at a distance of 1 kilometre for those very long distance head-ons, as we want to keep our opponents as far away from us as possible, and when we say opponents we mean enemy fighters. This also means that at 600 metres, which is an ideal range for attacking enemy bombers, we will get a very tight spray on enemy bombers and cut their fuselages to pieces with accurate fire. We are also using a 30-minute fuel load as per the norm to ensure that we can make it to the end of the game unscathed in terms of fuel capacity. As we go into a shallow dive here to go head to head with a Focke 190 A1, let us take a look at what range we open fire at. 1.2 kilometres, and we pick up our first kill at a distance of 970 metres, which means we can now snap right out of the way of the flying wreck and go towards the enemy Wellington, who is at an altitude of approximately 4,100 metres. Again, we're going to see a difference here. With that Focke 190 A1 we opened fire at 1.2 kilometres. With the Wellington we get well within convergence range by approximately 650 metres and kill them off at 400 metres. We then follow through with our momentum to attack a Focke 190 A4 who is beginning to level out after a significant climb and try to build up some energy. We cannot allow the A4 to do this because they are an absolutely devastating fighter and a better performer with increasing altitude by comparison with our own fighter. We knock them out for our third kill at a distance of approximately 400 metres, ripping off their left wing from their perspective and dodging a small amount of cannon fire coming under our right wing. As we come around to knock out another enemy Wellington that has just spawned in and intends to fly level, let us discuss why we opened fire at such an extreme distance against the Focke 190 A1, but against that first Wellington and this one, and indeed any bombers we face later on in this game, we will open fire at closer distances. So we said initially that we want to keep our opponents as far away as possible, and that is because our overall maneuverability and performance is nothing by comparison with a good number of the fighters we will face at our battle rate and tier combination. To name a few, the Spitfire F Mark 9, the Focke 190 A1 and A4, the Messerschmitt 109 F4, F1 and F2, and you get the picture. These are all planes which will be able to outmaneuver the P-51 Mustang, and a good portion of them will be able to climb with it or outclimb it. Although we did see the decent climb rate of the P-51 coming into good effect, we were able to outclimb that Focke 190 A1 at the start and proceed into a head-on with a small amount of dive behind us. In the meantime then, as we encroach upon the Heinkel 111H, let us continue our discussion. So these opponents we want to open fire at long distances via head-ons, because we have 420mm cannons, and this is why the highest burst mass ratings, or indeed armament setups, within the battle rate and tier combination, echoing that of the Sea Hurricane Mark 1C. This also means, however, when we go up against enemy bombers, we want to take the opposite approach. As we see here, we're getting close against this H6 variant of the Heinkel 111. And this is because a 600m gun convergence provides an adverse shotgun effect at closer ranges. You saw at 600 metres there how we were able to put a lot of rounds into the main fuselage of the H6, and most of our rounds did not spray significantly. At a distance of 400 metres, notice how we cut apart the back end of the fuselage, but we're not necessarily aiming for it in particular, and at the same time our rounds were spreading on towards the cockpit and the wings. This reverse shotgun spray means that when we go up against enemy bombers, larger profile targets, we will be able to use our lack of convergence at short distance to cause devastating effects to enemy bombers at these closer ranges and pick up kills a lot faster, because we will not necessarily only be shooting a given point on the enemy plane, but we will be shooting multiple points at the same time. It's very similar to that 300m gun convergence we saw in the Spitfire Mark 5C review, which you may see using a link in the top right corner of your screen now, except we're doing it in the reverse fashion. We want our opponents to be as far away as possible, i.e. enemy fighters, and when we're getting close to enemy bombers we want to be able to do as much damage as possible, and this 600m gun convergence enables that. Now we said about the decent climb rate of the P-51, and we can see here at an altitude of 5,900 metres, this plane is struggling to accelerate and its overall climb rate is starting to fall apart. Personally, from flying this plane, it is noticeable that above 4,000 metres altitude the Allison engine starts to lose its performance, and this echoes the historical performance of the plane, where its Allison engine dropped its performance in excess of 15,000 feet, which is actually quite close I believe to 4,000 metres altitude, although do not quote me on that. We notice the enemy Spitfire here, a Spitfire Mark 2A, climbing up and practically at a very low energy state, which is ideal for us. They probably have not even noticed that we are above them and heading towards them. And despite the fact that our engine's performance is rather weak up here, we can see that our speed is gradually increasing. As we go into a dive at a speed of 450 km an hour, heading towards 550 if not 600, we can catch up to the Spitfire well before they can react, and pick up what will be kill number 6. We then carry through with relative ease towards an enemy Corsair, who seems to be on the back end of a friendly P-51 Aerocobra, and we want to knock them out before our Aerocobra is dispatched. Here we can see that we maintain our speed and conserve our energy very well in a straight line coming out of that dive. Our speed now in excess of 600 km an hour, and we pick off the Corsair quite easily for kill number 7. Although notice something very important with that Corsair there, they flew in a relative straight line to our path. Now if the Corsair had broken left or right relative to us, it would have been a completely different story, and now this is one of the key weaknesses of the P-51. In excess of 600 km an hour, the control surfaces of this plane lock up horrendously, and when I say lock up horrendously, I mean in terms of not the elevator per se, but all the control surfaces in one fell swoop. This plane will become very haphazardous to overall input, whereby if you want to make a slight adjustment to bank slightly left to follow an opponent, you'll find that this plane becomes laboured and it is very difficult to trace targets unless they fly in very linear patterns such as that Corsair there, and we're going to echo this against a Yakovlev Yak-1 down below and another enemy fighter very shortly, although we have not discerned it yet. The Yakovlev is chasing our friendly Typhoon, and we're going to go after the Corsair as well and try and pick them both off in a single pass. As we pick up our speed here, coming down from over 5,000 metres altitude, an altitude range which this plane is not ideal for, as we have already said, we notice the Corsair is completely oblivious to our presence, and this means that despite our speed picking up and our elevator becoming very heavy now, we notice here, we pick up kill number 8, and then follow through onto the Yakovlev Yak-1 here for what will be kill number 9, what we intend it to be. Again, the Yak is unaware of our presence, and we quickly dispatch them for kill number 9. If they have banked left or right, we can already see how our elevator is becoming very heavy, and as a result this unresponsiveness, or lack of responsiveness we should say, in our control surfaces in general, bar the rudder, means that we would not have been able to follow our opponent. So we are sticking towards straight lines, and this is echoed in our concept of going for head-on passes at long distance against enemy fighters. We always want to fight in a straight path, not one which involves turn fighting, as despite the fact this plane handles rather nicely at a speed of say 400 to 500 km an hour in the horizontal, its turn circle is no match for most of the planes it will face at its battle rating. Yakovlev Yak-1s in particular will be able to outturn this plane with relative ease, and that is just one of many examples. We see here a B-25 Mitchell initially trying to head for what was a head-on with us, and then they come around again. We open fire at a distance of a kilometre and barely graze them. At the same time they just clip underneath our fuselage and we break over the top of them. Again, we use our relative amount of armour in order to soak up some 12.7mm machine gun fire and then come down on top of the B-25. Opening fire at long distance here, but we can't quite catch them in the midst of a dive. Our secondary pass is a little bit more effective as we run out of ammo, and we set the left wing of the B-25 on fire for what will hopefully be our double ace. In the meantime we go for another reload, and we now come onto the ammo capacity of this plane. 500 rounds in total, or 125 per gun, is very good, especially for this battle rating and tier combination, and this means that essentially you'll be able to pick off multiple targets if they are enemy fighters with relatively small amounts of ammunition and conserve a lot for later on. Indeed, you will find it quite frequent that you'll be able to pick up in excess of 3 kills on enemy fighters with a little bit of accurate aim and careful trigger finger, or indeed pick off say 1 or 2 enemy bombers such as B-25s before needing a reload. This means that this plane can stay very effective for a long period of time, as we now come around towards an IL-4 which is refusing to dive down, and so we must dispatch them. Although here we see the IL-4 starts to break downwards, but we are now committed. Unfortunately this means that the IL-4 was going to have to suffer, but we can also see once again how our control surfaces are becoming heavy, as the majority of our burst actually went into the left-hand wing from the IL-4's perspective, when we're aiming actually for the fuselage, or I hope you could see that. As we loop over the top then, we now come down towards some enemy fighters spawning in and trying to climb up towards us, in particular the Yakovlev Yak-1 and most likely that Messerschmitt 109. We go head to head with the Yak-1 here, opening fire at extreme distance once again, and coming down on top of them and clipping the oil tank. We break over the top here for what will be an Immelman before looping it back through into the Split S, and we see that the Yak-1 is stalling out right in front of us, or in a low energy state, and we can pick them off for another kill. With 12 now in the bag, we break up once again, and we can see how we have to keep our energy high, or indeed our speed high, in order to make sure our opponents cannot get onto the back of us. We have a Messerschmitt 109 here who is now trying to climb after us, and this is one of the key opponents which will be able to defeat this plane quite easily. As we see here, the ML1 is still climbing up towards us. As we level out, we go for the head-to-head here. We take a risk, gambling, and in fact it was an E3, with their 20mm cannon fire just coming underneath our fuselage thanks to the effects of gravity and their low speed by comparison with our position in the sky. It could have been very different if we'd not broken up, and we clip an LA5 for what was a rather lucky and fortunate 14th kill as we now break away from the enemy spawn and try to pursue an enemy P-39N Airacobra. Though we can see here, under a position of high pressure, and indeed one where we are not too high above our opponents, we are quite exposed. We open fire at long distance here to demonstrate the recoil effects on the 20mm cannons and how opening fire at long distance does not always work. Especially seeing as the P-39 was aware of our presence, and as we kept the trigger finger down, we started to miss. And also here we are allowing the Messerschmitt 109 to get onto the back of us, or at least at closer ranges. This is to demonstrate how, if an opponent is allowed to get into a position where they technically have more energy than you, or an equal position in terms of energy state, the P-51 is in a lot of trouble. We can see how this Messerschmitt 109 is still gaining on us, despite the fact we've now gone into a small dive. And the only way we're going to get away is if we break off to our left and go into a severe dive. We can see we were not pulling away, thanks to the fact that our acceleration in general is not great. It is decent, and unfortunately our friendly Firefly is not going to be able to catch up to the 109. As we have stated, we could just break down to lower altitude and use our dive speed to our advantage, but we want to demonstrate here a key weakness of the P-51, as that 109 now starts to catch up, and I believe that is an F1 variant which is pursuing us. We could go for a turn fight or for head-on here. As we see, as we break around for the head-on and the game fortunately for us ends, the 109 comes well within our convergence very quickly, and we have to snap right underneath them as the game comes to its end, and we now go into the post-game stats. With our 14 kills providing 66,763 silver lions and 4,917 research points, we must now come on to how one can defeat the P-51 in a given matchup. To do so, one has to take an indirect approach, whereby a direct approach would be a head-on pass and in trying to come around behind the P-51. This is ill-advised, simply because an accurate P-51 pilot will open fire at long distance and try to clip you with their 20mm cannons, with 1 or 2 rounds only needed to rip you apart. The indirect approach involves you bouncing the P-51 from a position of higher altitude, whether it be when the P-51 is coming out of a boom and zoom pass at lower altitude and trying to ascend, or alternatively from the outset when you are both climbing at the start of the game, and you'll be able to outclimb the P-51 in the vast majority of cases once your altitude goes above 4,000 metres, as the Allison engine of this plane begins to wane in its performance to a key extent. Once you're behind a P-51, do not surrender your grip, as this plane will not be able to outturn you or outmaneuver you unless it is at a low speed, i.e. 300 km an hour, and it is going up against planes such as the P-39 Airacobra or the F-4U Corsair, planes which are equivalent to it in maneuverability when these planes are all below 300 km an hour speed. The only way a P-51 is going to get away from you then is by going into an extreme extrapolated dive, at which point there are a small number of planes which can keep up, including but not limited to the Typhoon Mark 1A and Mark 1B, the Focke-Wulf 190 A4 and A1, or the F-4U 1A and 1D Corsair, although these planes are the minority, not the majority. And to enjoy success with the P-51, really you always need to keep your opponents well out of your way. And by going head on with your opponents at longer distances and confronting them well before they are prepared to confront you, you can see here that we're able to come first by comparison to the rest of our team by a huge extent. We took the fight to the Focke-Wulf 190 A1 and A4, the 2 higher altitude opponents at the start of the game, using our speed and decent climb rate to put ourselves in a position where we could engage them before they were prepared for us, and having dispatched them, we could then pursue down the enemy bombers, interdict the enemy fighters trying to climb up, and continue to pursue a boom and zoom style of play which was extremely linear, based around keeping our speed in a region of 400 to 550 km an hour and keeping our altitude approximately 3,000 to 4,200 metres, as these are the speed and altitude ranges which are suited for this aircraft, at least in my opinion. Indeed, if you are looking for a plane which is based around its firepower that it bears, then look no further, ladies and gentlemen, for I give you the Cannon Stang. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. Yes, until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.